As the highlight of the biggest stories we tracked for you over the course of this week. Now, on the local front, the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation in Nigeria, increased to 15.7% on a year-on-year basis just last month. And now looking at the national grid collapse, barely 48 hours after the Minister of Power, Abubakar Aliyu, had an emergency meeting with stakeholders in the power sector on the issue of collapse of the national grid at the start of this week and the state of electricity supply in the country, the national grid collapsed again, causing widespread darkness across the country. And by Wednesday, the federal government assures that all of these issues have been resolved. Latest monthly oil and gas report of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited has shown that the combined deficit of the headquarters of the NNPC and the three refineries under its management recorded 123.64 billion naira from January to September last year. And now looking at reports from the international front, Eurozone finance ministers have endorsed the European Commission's view that fiscal policy should move from supportive to neutral come next year. But they must also be ready with more cash should the war in Ukraine make it necessary. And looking at some of the highlights of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the Russian Finance Ministry in its latest move has also sent an order to a correspondent bank for payment of coupons on Eurobonds amounting to $117.2 million, a signal to markets waiting to see whether Russia will default on its sovereign debt. And now looking at some leadership tussles, Sarah Bloom-Raskin has withdrawn as President Joe Biden's nominee to become the top regulator at the Federal Reserve, one day after a key Democratic senator and moderate Republicans said that they would not back her, leaving no path to confirmation by the full Senate. Well, it's now time to bring you special packages prepared by our correspondents. Do watch.
February's inflation rate was up by 0.1% to stand at 15.7%, down from the 15.63% recorded in December last year. On month-on-month basis, headline index increased by 1.63% in February, and this was 0.16% higher than the rate recorded in the previous month. On a month-on-month basis, the urban index rose by 1.65% in February. This was higher compared to the rate recorded in January, which was 1.53%, while the rural index rose by 1.61%, also higher compared to the rate recorded in January, which was 1.42%.
The economy grew by 3.98% during the fourth quarter, with the oil growth rate of negative 8.06% and non-oil growth rate of 4.75%.
Total trade in the fourth quarter was valued at 11.7 billion naira, with export at 5.7 billion and imports valued at 5.9 billion, recorded a negative trade balance of 173.9 billion naira. Export trade was mainly dominated by crude oil, which amounted to 4.26 billion, which is 74.04% of total exports during the fourth quarter of 2021. Top 5 major trading partners in exports include India, Spain, France, the Netherlands, and Indonesia. And the top import trading partners were China, Belgium, India, the Netherlands, and the United States.
Major products imported were motor spirit, value at 1,443.91 billion, representing 24.31%.
The rise in the food index was caused by increases in prices of bread and cereals and other food products. On a month-on-month basis, the food sub-index increased by 1.87% in February, an increase from 1.62% recorded in the previous month. Economic watchers have warned that the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war would lead to a decline in the importation of wheat into the country, thereby pushing up the prices of staples like bread.
The arrival of the Comptroller General of Customs, Hamid Ali, to the Customs Training College. Inspecting the Guard of Honor, he moves on to tour facilities at the training college. Moving to the parade ground, the Comptroller General and top customs officials did an assessment of the cadets in training.
We are recruiting 4 categories of officers: level 8, 6, 4, and 3. So we now made it clear that every local government out of the 774 local government in Nigeria will produce 4 custom officers, 1 each from these categories. In the past, people bring names and then they are recruited, but we said no. First, we want to ensure that only interested custom officers, people who want to be custom officers, buy for this. Secondly, we must meet the spread as regards Federal Character Commission.
He also addressed the controversy surrounding the implementation of the Vehicle Identification Number Valuation Policy.
The valuation has been harmonized, and now you have one single valuation. And not only for the freight forwarders, importers themselves, it makes it easy for you. You can now access the portal, know how much you are supposed to pay, and you can go ahead and do your payment on your own. And you go and collect your vehicle. You don't need an agent. You don't need an agent to do this.
It's now time to bring you the feature on the show today as we take a look at matters arising within the aviation sector and the impact of the scarcity of aviation fuel on airline operations and also their ability to stay afloat. Don't go anywhere. Thank you very much for still staying with us. Let's now deal with the crux of today's discourse. Now, for the past 2 weeks, airlines operating in Nigeria face difficulty in obtaining aviation fuel, which is known as Jet A1 fuel, at the right price and in the quantity demanded. Now, the hardest hit are domestic carriers. Now, on Monday, members of the Airline Operators of Nigeria said that they had only 3 more days to fly because of the rising cost as well as the scarcity of aviation fuel for an oil-producing country. Now, this is another emblem of shame that should task the authorities. According to the AON, from 190 naira per litre in January this year, all marketers increased the price of the product to about 300 naira per litre, and by the 9th of February, it also rose to 405 naira per litre. Since then, the price has been increasing within hours, such that within 3 days last week, it rose from 450 naira to about 519 naira, and then about 615 to a price band of 670 naira per litre. Industry stakeholders believe that a quick intervention is necessary. Well, joining me now to discuss this and much more virtually, I have Chukwu Kechum, the Chief Operating Officer of Jet Support Services Limited. Thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much.
Now, time and time again, airlines have had to take several hits, especially with regards to operational cost and efficiency, from COVID to the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and now in Nigeria, we're dealing with the impact of the Jet A1 fuel scarcity having bitten harder on the pockets of airlines and even just the way they operate. And the price of aviation fuel hitting well over 700 naira per litre at the peak of some of the situations here in some airports. Now, what options do you think airlines have today? And really, what do you make of the back and forth we've seen so far, and then the pricing of the commodity as well as the calls to just crush this price to at least 500 naira per litre?
Yes, it's been a very difficult period for the entire industry, David. We've, fuel, as you know, is a critical part of the production stream of any airline. And not only have we seen a rapid uptick in fuel prices, we've also seen, the commodity being very difficult to get. So we've been having the airlines, more or less, body of airlines have been having a lot of consultations with the NNPC, the Independent Oil Marketing Association, and as it is right now, we are at the point where the industry is almost, grinding to a halt. Well, we also saw some intervention from the GMD of the NNPC, and hopefully, we believe that this intervention will bring some kind of short-term respite to the current issues that's bedeviling the industry.
And now, as part of highlights of conversations, airline operators are now to be issued licenses to import aviation fuel. And we have also seen that smaller aircraft are not necessarily enough of a solution, hence the call for immediate resolution of this matter at hand for good. How do you think we can have a sustainable resolution reached now?
I think showing the airlines licenses to import Jet A1 would be a proper short-term solution. Well, in the long term, maybe yes, because I do know that storage, dispensing of Jet A1 fuel is you know another work stream entirely on its own. Requesting it's something that requires a lot of investment in in compliance, a lot of investment in infrastructure, a lot of investment in certification. So, well, it does sound like a solution, but it's not a solution that will provide short-term respite. What we've heard from the last meeting with the GMD of the NMPC and the Independent Oil Market Association is that we are going to see the body of oil marketers and the AON sit together over the course of 3 days and then have a critical look as to the cost components of delivering Jet A1 to the industry. Subheads such as, the FX exchange rates, the landing costs per liter, logistics costs, premiums on top of premiums per airline would we more or less look at, and then we could then have a transparent pricing spectrum. So this is something that I do believe would create some kind of respite, and then we could see some transparency into the pricing, and hopefully this would more or less reduce this because the problem is the oil marketing industry is freighted in a lot of it's freighted with a lot of people don't really know how these prices are being derived. So the problem is we're looking at this negotiation, and then the entire industry could more or less have a clear direction as to how and how these prices are being arrived at. So it's at this point in time, David, the solution is outside the industry. The airline, it's not a matter of aircraft selection, it's not a matter of the type of aircraft, but rather it's more or less driven by the regulators, the oil marketers themselves, and the airlines are more or less taking a backseat on this one, David.
And talking about highlights, one of last week's highlights of the hearing by the House of Representatives ad hoc committee investigating the scarcity of aviation fuel was a statement by the executive director in charge of distribution systems for storage and retailing infrastructure of the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, that's the NMDPRA's claim was that the country has an excess supply of aviation fuel and accused the NCAA of not being sincere about the state of things in the sector, and also added that the country has about 34 days sufficiency of aviation fuel, adding that the reports of scarcity are false. Now, on the part of airlines, this evoked a very strong sentiment and a shock, just as much as the NMDPRA representative saying the scarcity is artificial, not real, there's enough stock. What do you make of both thoughts, both sides of the story's government stance as well as that of the airlines, really?
Yeah, David, you're quite right. That statement from the NMDPRA came as quite a shock, and it only revealed what the operators, had been clamoring about. What we are seeing, or what we have seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, is that we've seen a lot of customer profiling. We've seen that some of this, some of these marketers are in the practice of, hoarding this commodity and creating an artificial scarcity. And I mean, this is something that everybody had felt informally, but the statement from the NMDPRA, brought this more or less to light. Um, I mean, from a regulatory point of view, um, I mean the oil and gas market is more or less, especially for Jet A1, is more or less deregulated. So everybody's, allowed to fix their own prices. However, having knowledge of that does not mean that you know um, people are allowed to collude and come together and artificially, more or less create scarcity. So we are hopeful that this intervention by the GMB and the NNPC would bring some transparency into the industry, will bring some sanity into the industry, and more or less people can now critically start to look at the oil marketers themselves. If you say your product is 600 naira per liter, you should be able to understand why you are selling that commodity at 600 naira per liter. So I believe that the regulators, the AOM, the Independent Oil Marketers Association, are doing a lot of work right now. And then in the coming days, and David, I'm very sure that we'll be seeing a very firm resolution to this crisis.
And now, some of the biggest implications we had so far at the start of this week. By Sunday, we saw some passengers of Air Peace and Dana Air that were left stranded for hours at the Abuja airport over the lack of fuel to fly their aircraft. This had followed issues around ticketing and also the processing to ensure that they even get the tickets to fly, irrespective of the high cost. Now, for stranded air passengers and all the last-minute changes to the frequencies of flights, the communication of intent is important, you would say. Now, how much do you think it is for airlines to take seriously this issue around communication, relaying this to customers, and also having this buy-in? Because air travel still remains the safest means of travel. But at this point where we're experiencing some lull, how do you think airlines have to manage this line of communication, keeping up updates and providing all of these with the average customer who wants to travel by air?
Quite right, David. I mean, the average air travel customer is no longer trusting because speaking from a user point of view, the argument is that even before the scarcity of Jet A1, customers have still not been treated the best. They've been subjected to high incidence of delays, cancellations, and it just feels like this story about the Jet A1 being scarce and expensive is just another ploy by the airlines to more or less justify the bad treatment that customers have been receiving. But however, in this particular case, David, Jet A1 is a key production, subhead for an airline. And there's no way, no matter how beautifully designed an aircraft is, that it can perform its design functions without fuel. But it is the duty of the airlines to more or less communicate effectively to the customers, because the ticket paying customer, who has a contract with the airline after paying his ticket, you know, should not really be bothered about how the airline achieves its contractual objectives. They want to move from point A to point B at a particular time, and then as a body of airlines, the responsibility is on that airline to deliver its contractual agreement. So, of course, there are, cases or circumstances where an airline is not able to fulfill its obligations, and it is the duty of the airline to ensure that the customer is carried along, the customer is taken care of. And we are beginning to see that, David. We're beginning to see some airlines even reach out to customers via digital means and informing them of possible delays, not even, so we're seeing airlines forecasting their delays and communicating in advance of these delays. We're not there yet, David. We're not there yet as a body of airlines, but I do believe that this is something that over the last 2 or 3 months, um, a couple of airlines have taken a lot of heat on the social media, and we've seen quite some improvement personally.
Now, Nigeria is about the only OPEC country trapped in this interesting quagmire of complete dependence on foreign refineries for product it has capacity to produce locally. We are yet to fully settle the petrol scarcity, doubled with the jet aviation fuel scarcity. Do you think we can have a lasting, sustainable solution to this development, as we are largely dependent on imports and open to external shocks beyond our control to meet our demand?
Agreed, David. Yes, I mean, Nigeria is, I mean, like you said, one of the only countries in an OPEC member that isn't able to refine its own consumption. However, David, there are several countries in the world that have fully fledged aviation industries without even having, a single refinery. So the key problem here, David, is not necessarily the refining capability of Nigeria. However, the problem is transparency, David. Um, how can you have one marketer selling a product at 440 naira and another marketer in the same location selling the same product at 630 naira per liter, and this marketer is still in business? So it is a problem of transparency. It is a problem of regulation, and then we are hoping to see that with this current problem, we would have a lasting resolution. We would have a transparent pricing system where you can tell. I mean, David, the price of crude oil all over the world is going up, and there is no way you can have the source commodity go up without an attendant increase in the final product, which is Jet A1. So refining capability or not, David, we would always see we are in a global economy. Whatever is happening in America, or in the UK, or even in the Ukraine and the Ukrainian crisis, will definitely have an impact all over the world. So the issue is not necessarily refining capability, but rather I would say regulation, transparency, and then hopefully we can have an oil industry that is devoid of these issues that I have just mentioned.
And now we're wrapping up our conversation. The Russia-Ukraine crisis is also having a tremendous negative impact on global travel, mainly among neighboring states, while the spike in fuel prices is also pressuring cost of global airlines emerging from the 2-year COVID-19 crisis. With the international airlines also suffering from a sharp rise in oil prices, the additional cost of having to reroute flights to avoid Russian airspace, this is also expected to tick up the ticket prices and also air cargo rates. How do you see IATA's financial forecast for the industry playing out?
Yes, it's definitely a shock. Well, not anywhere close to what we experienced in 2020, But however, the direct effect will be on the demand space, where you will see, of course, world over, we're having an escalation in the prices of Jet A1, and of course, the airlines would not take that hit without directly transferring it to the ticket-paying customer. So this would directly reflect on the cost of tickets, and then you have non-essential travel suffer. And I mean, if a customer has to pay more per trip, the customer has to think twice if the customer wants to embark on that trip. So you're going to have a direct impact on the demand space. Like I said, because of the upsurge or the uptick in ticket prices, you're going to have a reduction in non-essential travel. And yes, the airlines, I mean, Europe, America, Africa had already started to see, a huge percentage in increase in demand. You know, the recovery was already coming until we had this new shock with the unfortunate Ukrainian and the Russian Ukraine issues. So we're looking at having more or less this situation resolved as soon as possible, and hopefully, we could bring some sanity back into Europe, and then with that attendant increase in demand in Europe, we see a demand and more or less a direct impact with more or less all over the world. So it's a shock for sure, but not yet anything close to what we we are seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic, David. Not on that proportion.
Thank you so much for your time on the show today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much.
Well, just before we go now, here are graphic details of Nigeria's average retail price of automotive gas oil, which is known as diesel, in the month of February, as prepared by the National Bureau of Statistics. And on that note, this is the wrap on this edition of Business Week. Many thanks for watching so far. To enjoy the rest of your weekend, I'm David Alabi. Bye for now.